Welcome to the show Brain Rot, What Our Screens Are Doing to Our Minds, a special series from the New Books Network. Here are your hosts, Dr. Karyne Messina and Dr. Harry Gill.
Hi, and welcome to the New Book Network's Climate Psychology Alliance of North America podcast on climate change. The channel is Psychology and Climate Change. My name is CK Westbrook. Today I am serving as a guest host on the New Books Network, New Books in Psychology channel. My guest is actually the host of the podcast, Dr. Karyne Messina, as well as Dr. Harry Gill, her co-author of Disconnected Together, A Guide to Reclaiming Connections in a Digital World. I found this book timely, informative, inspiring, and soothing because it addresses so many hard situations and provides helpful suggestions and fantastic toolkits. I'm going to introduce myself really quick, and then I'm going to do a thorough introduction of both of the authors. I'm CK Westbrook. I'm an environmentalist and author who lives and works in Washington, D.C. I'm the author of the science fiction series, The Impact series, which includes the shooting, the collision, the judgment, and the aftermath. My books cover many issues, including gun violence, space debris, the Kessler syndrome, how we are polluting the environment on Earth and in space, personal responsibility, sexism and misogyny, and other fun topics. I love weaving real-world topics and crisis into suspenseful science fiction. I have a BA from Florida International University and a master's in environmental and natural resource policy from the George Washington University. Okay, first I'm going to introduce Dr. Karyne Messina. She's a psychologist, a psychoanalyst, and author. She is on the medical staff of Suburban Hospital, which is part of Johns Hopkins Medicine. She is chair of the American Psychoanalytic Association's Department of Psychoanalytic Education, Scholarship, and Writing section, and is a member of the President's Commission on Artificial Intelligence of the same organization. Dr. Messina has also written 8 books and has 3 more that will be released in 2026. Her topics focus on applying psychoanalytic ideas to real-world issues we all face in our complex world. She is currently writing a book that will be published by Routledge in February of 2026 about the connection between mechanisms of defense, projection, and projective identification, and AI bias. The title is Projection, Projective Identification, and AI Bias, using psychoanalysis to build more equitable artificial intelligence. She is also a podcast host for the New Books Network and a YouTube co-host for Psychoanalytic Perspectives on Racism in America with Dr. Felicia Powell-Williams and Brain Rot, What Our Screens Are Doing to Our Minds, that she is hosting with Dr. Harry Gill, a psychiatrist who also has a PhD in neuroscience. And she's a co-author of the book we're going to discuss today. And recently, Dr. Messina became a co-editor of the journal Psychotherapy and Psychoanalysis in China. She will assume the position of editor-in-chief in 2026. And the second author of this fantastic book is Dr. Harry Gill. He's a physician, entrepreneur, and neuroscience PhD who has devoted his career to helping people, particularly teenagers, overcome mental health challenges. A keen observer of the human condition, Dr. Gill is a champion for reclaiming our time and attention from vacuous online media and investing in building a more compassionate and connected society. In his 2 decades of clinical practice, including as medical director of behavioral health sciences at several leading hospitals in the Washington, D.C. area, Dr. Gill has directly overseen treatment for hundreds of patients whose psychiatric conditions range in severity from mild to life-threatening. After earning an MD in general practice from the University of Zagreb School of Medicine, Gill left Croatia in 1992 to pursue a doctorate in neuroscience and psychology at Iowa State University. He then served as chief medical officer with the State of Iowa Department of Human Services Medicaid Agency. Dr. Gill served as the medical director and chair of several departments of psychiatry in the D.C. metro region. He also served as executive director of the Washington School of Psychiatry. Today, Dr. Gill is a board-certified psychiatrist, an assistant clinical professor at George Washington University, and the president of HDMD LLC, a private clinical psychiatric practice in New York City. He also serves as the medical director for Embark Behavioral Health, program for providing mental health services to youths and adults aged 13 to 25. Working with families and young individuals grappling with the fallout of digital immersion has provided him with his firsthand insights into the destructive nature of uncurated screen time and social media. That was the inspiration for the book, Disconnected Together. All right, are you guys ready to jump into some questions?
Sure.
Dr. Gill, let's start with the hardware. Your book combines 2 very different fields, Why did you feel it was necessary to bring hard neuroscience into a conversation about family relationships? What is physically happening in our brain that makes digital disconnection so pervasive?
I think I wanted to really emphasize the point that the brain is the organ that we use to process information, to think, make conclusions, make decisions, and it is an organ that develops. It's not something that we're born with, like a kidney or a heart. It is utterly interdependent with the world that we live in, what the shape of that organ and the function is in the end. So focusing parents that on the theme that what the child is experiencing, what the child is witnessing, what they're learning really has long-term impacts because some of those experiences are embedded in the wiring of the brain. So hardware and focusing on the hardware is a really important aspect of this book. I used to teach consciousness and separation between materialist and dualist position, and the notion of psyche versus brain is very near and dear to me. So in this book, I really wanted to focus on the brain.
Dr. Messina, you approach this from the software side, the mind and relationships. In your clinical practice, you describe hearing the story of disconnection. From a psychoanalytic perspective, what was the story about, and how have iPhones changed the geometry of our relationships?
There's an interesting word that has sort of, I don't know if it's popped up, I don't know if it's been here for a long time, but I've been aware of it lately, and it's technoferrence. And basically, it's when technology interferes with the connection between, we'll say, a mother and an infant. So infants learn about themselves through a reflection. It goes back and forth between mother and baby or dad and baby. That's how they learn about feelings. That's how they learn to soothe themselves. Well, if they're in this process with mom or dad, and all of a sudden, what the parent says, "Oh, let me get this," and they go off to their computer, or they send a text, or they answer a call, that connection's broken. So just imagine that little infant who's getting all their information from their brains, but also in terms of social information from their parent, and also the parent's just gone. So that's when technology interferes with development. So I think that's something to really be aware of, and to counsel people that they need to focus on their child, or it happens with older kids too. An example would be, say, a younger child, a toddler, is learning to climb on something. Maybe there's a little ottoman or something, and you can see the joy in the child's face that mom is watching, dad is watching, and he's going to get to the top of the mountain. But somebody runs off with their phone, and they go in the other room and say, this will just be a minute. You could see deflated faces. So that's, I think, really critical for people to be focused on, and to consciously think about, let me put this stuff away. This is family time. Now, I also want to say, in terms of Dr. Gill's background, this wasn't mentioned, but he has a background in psychoanalytic thinking as well. So if you have any thoughts, Harry, please chime in.
I think you're hearing it. It's really, it emphasizes how close the notion of brain and the operations of the brain and the brain development are on all of these soft topics, like relationships and love and connection and security and self-esteem. This is actually partly why I ended up getting a PhD in neuroscience and psychology. You mentioned I have psychoanalytic psychotherapy training, so we speak very much the same language. So emphasis on the neighborhood of all of these concepts is what we really try to bring to the audiences in this book.
And kind of building on that, like the frustration or rejection a child might feel, a little kid might feel when a parent is looking at the phone when they're not looking at them. And then the other way that passive phones can hurt is like hijacking play, right? So play is extremely important for children's brain development. But when you kind of give them a screen, either TV or phone, what does that do to the process?
It happened during COVID a lot. Parents had to work, so that was understandable. Everybody was at home together, and little children got iPads. So, first of all, they didn't know what to do with them, but they just saw this bright, shiny programming. Nobody was explaining it to them. Parents had to work. And when they started kindergarten, they had no clue of how to interact with the teacher, with other children, because they've been at home. So that was that. I just wanted to add that we've seen that on the very bad end of the spectrum.
And speaking from the hardware perspective, I think one of the most detrimental aspects of play in the virtual space versus play in the real space is the sort of relative ease in which in virtual space kids can move blocks around, create magical worlds. One of my least favorite games was the tower build game where you have a little kid, as mentioned in the book in the intro, and all he had to do is put a finger on the screen, and all of these magical things were happening, and he did nothing. The finger was on the screen. That was the extent of that. And the loss of the mastery that has to be developed, the internalized sense that learning is hard, that building a tower with blocks is challenging, that writing a story is complicated and it requires knowledge and thought and reflection versus, hey, Chat GPT, write me a story about whatever, and it just happens. So the loss to the actual, if you will, musculature of the brain is tremendous because lifting up a 1 pound weight, which would be playing on the screen, is very different than mastering ability to lift a 25-pound weight. And to begin to think about the brain as an organ, not unlike our muscles, that require exercise and to develop agility and strength, the screens really detract from developing agility and strength in both young minds, but also in the adult minds as well.
Okay, so we've kind of covered that in young children, rejection, messing with the trust and mistrust from early development, that it interferes with the importance of play for mental muscle building as well as imagination. What about the concept? I think this is for you, Dr. Gill, observe and return interaction in early childhood. Can you explain the neuroscience behind this and what happens to a child's synaptic pruning if those interruptions are replaced by screens?
So synaptic pruning is a really important concept, and I want to clarify it a little bit. The neurons that work together stay together is the concept. So the neurons that don't work together are pruned because brain develops in a manner that optimizes efficiency, speed of reaction, quick understanding of the situation, and appropriate response to the stimulus. Absent that, and absent the training of what a human interaction is, a child doesn't develop requisite ability to communicate. The striking example from recent news reporting, New York public education system removed screens from the schools, which is wonderful. They're facing the reality that they have to teach kids how to do handshakes, how to do eye contact with each other, because those functions have not been established. Therefore, those entire networks have not been pruned adequately. And from the perspective of not paying attention to the child, or children not paying attention to each other, or doing interactive play, which is very different than parallel play when two kids are next to each other on two different devices playing Minecraft, versus problem solving and negotiating problem solving. Those are all networks of the brain that just don't get developed and produce adults that I treat a lot of them that leads to failure of adulting, which is a new term, where at the time when they have to become adults and they go to school, they simply are incapable of accomplishing the most basic social interactions or even self-care. We have pandemic of executive functioning problems because people just can't organize their time. They don't know how to sequence problems, the simplest of things.
And I would say, like, as an adult who obviously is older, I mean, there was not phones until I was a full-grown adult. When an adult picks up the phone and starts looking at it when I'm speaking, I get frustrated and I'll say, I'm going to wait until you're done with your phone. So I haven't really adjusted to the world of that's somehow totally acceptable. So for a child, wow, or a kid, it's just a mind mess, like whole new level of social interaction. So, Dr. Messina, you introduced a fascinating concept called the leaky container. Can you explain what that means in terms of a parent's ability to handle a child's emotion when they are distracted by a device?
Absolutely. But before I do that, I'd like to congratulate you on telling that adult, I'm going to wait until you finish with what you're doing. So many times people are frustrated. They get more and more anxious because their friend, their boss, whoever it is, they continue with their phone and the person is just kind of sitting there waiting. But the frustration builds, and sometimes they don't, or they can't, or they don't have the wherewithal to say anything. So it is important to make a statement. I mean, you don't have to finger point and start screaming at the person, but I think what you said is perfectly fine. It's really good. I'll wait till you're finished.
I want to jump in and emphasize that that's a really, really critical boundary issue where we should empower ourselves to require that level of attention. I'm fascinated. My younger son grew up in this world, and if we're out for dinner, and one of us pulls a phone out, he will say, "Put the cell phone down," and he demands the full attention if he's telling us a story. So it's possible and important. Sorry for interrupting.
No, I'm glad. Let's do that. The more of a conversation this becomes, the better. So back to the leaky container question. Well, Wilfred Beyond was a psychoanalyst in Great Britain, and he was a very smart guy, and he talked about something known as the alpha function. Nobody knows what that is unless they're a psychoanalyst or they've read about it. But basically, that's how children learn to soothe themselves. So a baby, let's say an anxious child who is crying and crying and crying and can't self-soothe yet, if the mother or the father takes that anxiety, so it's almost as if they put it into the parent, so to speak, metaphorically anyway. And the parent teaches, not directly, but by their actions, how to soothe the child. So they contain it. They are the container. So they say, "Sweetie, it's going to be okay." Maybe if they're holding a baby, they can't pat the baby's back, or a 2-year-old. They say, "It's okay, Sarah. It's all right. It's all right. Jonathan, you're going to be okay. It's okay. Come over to mom. Come over to dad. Everything will be okay." So the children, Jonathan or Sarah, eventually pick that up. They identify with it. They take it in. Well, if they enter a phone, so a parent is in this process of soothing a child, we'll say, a good, adequate parent, and the phone rings, and they say, "Oh, it's my boss. I got to go." And they say, "Okay, wait a minute, sweetie." And they start talking. Well, the child is in just a state of distress. And now mom or dad is gone or preoccupied. So their anxiety starts to leak from the container, so to speak. So maybe mom or dad, they don't want to do this, but they feel like they have to because either it's important or they're so addicted to answering the phone every time someone calls or responding to a text every time they get one. Maybe they're addicted to it. Whatever's going on with them is unfortunate because the little child or the baby is there waiting, so to speak, to be soothed. They don't know that, but they're wanting it, and yet they're not getting it. So the anxiety is leaking. It's actually leaking all over. We want to contain the anxiety of children.
This is so critically important, Karen, this concept, because I don't know how explicitly we mentioned this in the book, but I believe that leaky container and inability to obtain alpha function or develop an alpha function is the reason why we're seeing epidemic of anxious and depressed adolescents. In my practice as medical director of Embark Behavioral Health, I literally see hundreds of kids every month. Most of the Eastern Seaboard, I do most of the assessments, and kids simply do not have capacity to contain their anxiety. They are okay while they're with their friends. They may be okay while they're with the parents if the parents are okay. The moment they're alone, they're anxious, they're dysregulated, they need a screen. They cannot go to sleep because they're dysregulated. So then we have tussle of war of bedtime with screens that are necessary to self-regulate but keep them awake, and then they're tired. So the centrality of that teaching of the self-soothing function by a parent is so central to this entire generation of anxious and depressed children. I can't emphasize it enough. And the seeming soothing that happens when a child is dysregulated and a parent, instead of teaching how to regulate yourself, hands child a pad or a phone or something. Now, we haven't contained anything. We have distracted from the dysregulation, and distraction is not a dysregulation. And in fact, going back to the pruning thing, we have now taught the child that when they're dysregulated, they should reach for a screen and maybe binge watch Netflix, which later on we will fight them on because they need to get off the screen. So the development of the brain and the wiring and how we're basically teaching the dysfunctional or maladaptive coping mechanisms is a price we're paying for the generation that is really experiencing skyrocketing rates of depression, anxiety, self-harm, the identity issues, like the list goes on and on. And having practiced for now 23 years, I was a psychiatrist before the iPhone, at the onset of iPhone, and I'm treating kids that have grown up with iPhone in their hands, and it is very, very different.
And I would just add, and this is just an observation, if you're a parent and you love your kid, and phones are so easily to distract, and in the pre-phone world, our parents were distracted by a million things too, but the phone, wow, that's like addictive. And then it's like, when I walk by like playgrounds and you see all the nannies in DC with all the little kids and toddlers, they are all looking at phones. So, and I feel like, okay, I know parents' love and nourishment, all that is way more important, but these kids all day long are kind of competing against the phone, because in the old days, what would a nanny be doing? Maybe reading, maybe talking to other nannies, or engaging with the children, but they're just as distracted by the phone as well.
Absolutely. I've witnessed the same thing in the playground with my child, and it was astonished. It's like nobody looks at anybody anymore. The gaze is gone. The connection of brain to brain, of eye to eye, is disappearing. It's absolutely astonishing.
Dr. Gill, moving to the teenage years, you describe the adolescent brain as a tale of two systems, the gas pedal and the brakes. Can you explain that analogy and why it makes teens so susceptible to social media addiction?
That is sort of a translation of Freudian concept of id, ego, and superego. Id being the center of drives, which are sexual and aggressive drives. So that's gas that keeps us going. We want to attain, we want to appetitive behaviors, we want to experience pleasure. And then superego that develops as a set of moral norms and social contracts, if you will, serves as brakes. And ego is kind of crushed between these two forces. So if we think of an adolescent brain, id, because of hormonal pressures, is now really, really amped up, particularly the sexual and desire to connect and desire to compete and identify with a group. Very powerful chemically driven forces in a brain where prefrontal cortex, which is basically the seat of superego, is relatively underdeveloped. The only part of the brain that has one function, which is to say no, in other words, inhibit the rest of the activity of the brain, is the prefrontal cortex. It lets the stimulus go by, or it says, no, you're not doing this. And those are the brakes that are really undeveloped. So from that perspective, when an algorithm that is tuned to provide pleasurable input to the teen brain, you have full-on gas, very low brakes, and lots of pleasure that is fueling the id. It doesn't have to be endless exploration of pornography. It can be simply one of the most evil things that appeared on our TV screens is the Netflix discovery of continue to the next episode, continue to the next episode. So people that design algorithms are fully aware of our brains' built-in inertia that says, I should probably push the stop button at this point in time, but what the hell, it was an interesting episode. Let me see the next one. So the inertia guides us into just hanging in there for more stimulus. The design of Instagram in particular is absolutely brilliant. It is a maze that has no meaning. It is completely incomprehensible to a 57-year-old. Like every time I go, it's like, how does this even work? Like I can never find what I look for, but I can sure spend 3 hours looking at stuff that is served to me. So putting in a teenage brain with little breaks, bad things happen all the time. And sometimes as a practitioner, I will say horrible things happen. We talked about sextortion, and I'll leave that piece to Dr. Messina, but some of the horrors of clinical experience we discuss in the book and in our podcasts.
Yeah, it's Instagram. As a author, I'm encouraged to constantly putting content up, and I'm just like, it's just crazy. And I'm like, is it my publisher that wants me to put the content up, or is it Instagram that wants me to put the content up? Like, because that feeds the vicious cycle, right? That I feel like we're all bought into it. And you're right, a teenage mind, wow, so much meaningless, pointless, and sometimes harmful stimulation. So, Dr. Messina, this is the stage Erickson called identity versus role confusion. In chapter 6, you talk about the social mirror. How has the digital mirror of Instagram and TikTok distorted a teenager's search for their authentic self?
Well, what is so important here is the very first part of your question, which is identity versus role confusion. This is where consolidation of all the earlier stages happens. It's when a teenager figures out, who am I? Who am I going to be? Where am I going to go? What am I about? And so they need to get that feedback from real people, not social media. So a social mirror, we'll say, is from real people, whereas a digital mirror is getting it from social media. And unfortunately, algorithms, the way they're set up, gives them a lot of false information. So it's goes into the mix of figuring out, we'll say we're making a cake, but what goes into the mix is the wrong ingredient. So I'm mixing my metaphors here, but how do you figure out who you are? How do you get a good, we'll say, vanilla cream splash cake if you don't have the right ingredients? If you're purposefully getting the wrong things, then how do you figure out, how do you get a good cake, the right cake? Or how do you figure out who you are, who you want to be, what you stand for, what matters to you, what your values are, apart from your parents? It used to be easy enough because kids would maybe identify with aspects of their parents and not identify with others, and they would become their own people. But now they have not only parents to contend with and sort of break away from in some aspects and identify with other aspects, but now they have this other group, like social media, their peers, but also the falseness of algorithms and social media. So it's very tricky. I think it's very hard to be a teenager these days.
And in some ways, Karen, to amplify what you're saying, from clinical experience, I grew to believe that teenage years have been stolen from kids because they're pushed maturationally into the hypersexualized world of people. Again, I see girls that are 14 that have fake eyelashes, that are getting Botox, that are concerned about their body shape. It used to be that our world, we're all older here, so we grew up in a world without the screens. Our world was kind of ending with our friends, friend group, school, and maybe what we saw on television. But being inundated with images of hypersexualized, plastic surgery transformed bodies really interferes with identity formation. And who am I? It used to be mirrored by a relatively small group of people. Now it's mirrored by millions of influencers that are getting on our screens.
Yeah, is it more important to have one person in the room like you or 700 likes?
Exactly.
And what dramatic thing will you do to get those 700 or 7,000 or a million likes? It's insanity versus, of course, the people that you love in the room. But going a little further on that, what about the default mode network? How important is it to the teenage brain and child brain to just be bored sometimes? Dr. Gill, do you want to answer that?
It's my favorite topic for all kids. They love to say, I'm so bored. And my immediate response to all of them is, that's great. And then they look at me like I sprouted the second head. and say, well, why is that great? That is space. It is space for reflection. It is space for thought. It's a space for brain to metabolize the sensory experiences. If we're constantly bombarded with sensory input, memory is sort of like, think of it as a videotape, if people know what that even is, but a recording device. So there's all of this random stuff that is experienced during the day that just sits there. And brain needs time to metabolize, process, and sort that into kind of a neatly organized garage. So if you think of a garage into which you just throw stuff all day long, at night, it's a mess. So at night, the sleep is disrupted because the brain is trying to digest all of this garbage that has been put in there, and there is not enough time. Boredom also allows the reflection on, well, what do I think about this friend? What do I think about this class? What do I think about my life? The biggest time where the fear sets in from 16 to 18, the separation individuation stage, where kids need to think about, what am I going to be when I grow up? That time has now completely collapsed into the screen. They have no time to think about it. And the moment they lift their eyes from the screen, they panic. And then they get anxious and panicked and don't want to go to school and implode. And then the parents bring them to us for treatment. When in fact, all they really need is time. Time is limited. Time is perishable. Screens are forever. So boredom is incredibly important space for us to sit back and think.
I'd just like to add for an example. I have a patient who who had a childhood disease and was separated in the evening from parents. They thought it was best for the child to go to bed, but the child was freaking out and would try to get into the parents' room, and the door was locked. So now this person in her early 30s freaks out at night. Absolutely. She functions very well during the day, but freaks out at night and cannot spend 5 minutes alone. Immediately the phone comes out and she starts scrolling for things to buy or music, or she doesn't listen to this stuff, but she keeps it feels like an addiction to me. She likes certain designers and she'll keep scrolling for hours. She might actually fall asleep about 4 a.m. and she's often late for our sessions for that reason. So there really is something important about boredom or just being with yourself. I mean, how a lot of teenagers, if you think about or mention that it's good to be by yourself sometimes, they will look at you at like, or as Dr. Gill said, like it's just sprouted another head. What do you mean? Like, it's like they're always in, if not physical motion, their minds are spinning all the time.
I want to share a phenomena which I think is happening in New York school system right now. When I first started running the program, actually in DC in Cabin John, they were still allowing phones in the program. And my office had a glass door, so I would see these kids. They would go to groups. They would do what they're supposed to. They were this beautiful big space with snacks and bananas and apples and whatever, and football and chairs and sofas. And they would come out and they would all just sit in their own separate space, staring at the phone, not talking to one another at all. And this was, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago. So I had to do some pressure on people that worry that if the phones are taken away, the kids wouldn't come or they wouldn't stay or comply with the program. It was near miraculous that within 2 days of taking the phone, you saw life happen. You know, from this deafening silence of the space where these kids were just sitting, they were talking, they were playing foosball, they were grouping, they were doing all the normal things that teenagers need to be doing. I'm talking about 13 to 18 age group of kids. So the influence of the phone is undeniable. It's damaging. I'm so happy to see that governments are getting organized. You know, Australia is banning social media. The school systems are realizing, you know, we really need to look at it as a necessary evil presence in our life that needs to be carefully managed and monitored.
I'd just like to add that as of last week, I read that there are 21 states that are banning phones during school hours. So It seems like the numbers are rising. I hope that trend continues.
Mhm.
And Dr. Gill or Dr. Messina, if you could just add to that as far as how is this affecting people's capacity for empathy? Because face-to-face communication is kind of necessary for empathy, and we're a less empathetic society recently.
Well,
Yes. Just
go ahead, Karen.
you go ahead. I'm just yes, we know.
I will share. I want to share something from pre-screen time. Yeah, I was medical director, as I said, of psychiatric hospitals, and learned very quickly that people are much readier or quicker to yell at me or berate me if it's a phone call, meaning if they don't see me. So my practice was like, you want to talk to me? You come. And that would expose them both to the situation, and they would see me in the real life and see what I do for a living. So it would create empathy on their part for my work. And then they would see me as a human being with completely three-dimensional reactions to wherever they were heading with their questions. So reading the comments, I stopped doing it years ago, but reading the comments on a news story is sometimes nauseating with this sort of rage that spills out of people that is accumulated from somewhere where they can't express it. And the venom that is directed, it is absolutely abhorrent. And with teenagers in particular, like where they're beginning to develop a sense of empathy and it's fairly limited, the notion of the words hurt and the words have consequences. I've treated kids for years a friend, this is an actual example, a friend stole their Facebook account. This is in the early days of social media, and posted all sorts of stuff on their behalf. Police got involved and the friend ended up in prison, and then this whole school exploded. So these are dangerous tools. They're giving a machine gun to an underdeveloped brain. It's just not a good idea, but we've readily done it. So I'm glad to see we're pulling back from that practice.
I just like to mention a concept that I think you maybe you were going to ask about this, but it's psychic retreat. And it's the idea, John Steiner is the person who came up with this, but screens provide a perfect way to escape painful experiences. So say a friend has yelled at you, or you've been excluded from a party, or whatever might have happened. With an adult adolescent, it works. The same thing works. With psychic retreat, they hide. If you start scrolling or you start looking on Instagram or wherever you're looking, it's a retreat from pain. So it's not a good thing, but it just sort of it covers up pain. And we use that all the time. The collective.
And we can take that pain even further. And you have another concept, folie plaisirs. I'm awful at French. The madness of many, which I feel like when teenagers get angry at another teenager or whatever, that it's like bullying on steroids, right? And it also happens to adults. It happens to TV networks. I mean, it's crazy. Like, I mean, we've always been afraid of mobs, right? Ever since the American Revolution. I mean, you can go all the way back in time. People get out of control, but these are almost like mobs online, and they're just as dangerous.
This is, again, one of my favorite brain functions. So what is real and what is not real? And touching, CK, on your area, this notion is climate warming up or not? Is it real? Is it not real? Are we making it up? Yeah, down to, we actually had a podcast, I think, on this topic, like Kim Kardashian says, we never landed on the moon. And all of her followers think that we never landed on the moon, or at least are wondering if we landed on the moon. Reason being that the capacity of the brain to tell that something is real is relatively limited unless we see it, touch it, smell it, can handle it, and maybe lick it. Then we know, okay, this is real. But conceptually, when we talk about something, it is really, really amazing to see how certain things can be disappeared. I took out of my bio, I grew up in a communist system, so my brain was trained to look for things that had disappeared. And it is fascinating to see how climate issues are sort of disappeared. They just vanished. or Israel-Palestine war sort of vanished and we don't talk about it anymore, or when oil in Nigeria is of interest, all of a sudden the Christians getting killed is a topic of interest and that appears. And so the extent to which media, AI, corporations can play with our sense of reality is actually quite astonishing. CK, you and I talked before this podcast about looking at the news as they're presented to you, where you may see the same thing or they know what you're interested in. You never see that stuff that you're kind of maybe not interested in, but it's really important for you to know. So old fogies like PDFs, or they like actual paper, because you kind of want to get a sense of that notion of sense versus being presented with a stimulus that is pleasurable and you're used to it and that's what you want, and you're always eating the same kind of candy. You never try a different kind of candy.
Along that same line of thinking, what is really distressing to me is the new normal, which I think if you just hear the same story and the same story over and over again that isn't true, you start thinking that it is true. And you discount the other side of the story that's tragic or devastating or whatever the state may be, because you're hearing, oh, the storm really wasn't that bad. It really wasn't that bad. Meanwhile, 300 people were killed. But if you don't hear that, because things are curated in such a way that we're hearing only a slice of something, you don't know what's actually happening.
We're dismissing, along exactly that same vein, Karen, I'm glad you brought that up, the terrible consequences of overinflating reality. Here, everywhere where I lived, it's if the rain comes, you think it's Noah's Ark is required. We're all going to die. It's going to be 2 inches of rain. There's utter and total hysteria about some weather event. And then when the actual bad weather event happens, nobody pays attention. So a whole bunch of kids drown, or people get stuck under the bridges, or people die because we have cried wolf so often that now we no longer pay attention to what's really real. So there's some real life consequences to the way we're presented with information.
So I would say that a lot of what we've just been discussing absolutely impacts teenagers more so because they have less development. But kind of going into the adult and to senior citizens in our society, do you guys want to point out a couple of highlights from adult and senior citizens, just because we're kind of short on time, that are I think the most important points out of the book, because there's so many, but what do y'all think is the most important things for people to be thinking about?
I'll take Erickson's last stage of development, integrity versus despair. And during this period, when people are older, they have a chance to look back and reflect on their life and to put the pieces together that make them feel that there was integrity, that they lived a good life, not a perfect life, but they did what they could, and they were who they wanted to be fundamentally. And there were losses, perhaps, in the story that they create or think about in terms of themselves, versus somebody who doesn't have that capacity, or from a psychoanalytic perspective, is in the state of denial. It's too painful, so they just push it away. And they don't do that consciously, but because it's defense mechanisms are unconscious unless somebody points it out, or unless somebody comes to realize, well, wait a minute, let me really look at my life. Let me not just gloss it over. But when you're at the end of your life and you're in a state of despair, to me, that feels pretty sad. Because no one has a perfect life, but it's good if you can pick up the gems and gather them together and admire them and be pleased with those that you've collected. And maybe feel badly about those that you lost or didn't collect. But it's important to have this time of self-reflection.
Yeah, and as a chronic sort of anti-screen person, I will say, as we get older, there are aspects of these screens and social media in particular that are actually useful,
Yeah.
because working in the aging space, I work with in nursing homes, assisted living. Lots of my patients are also aging in their 80s, our ability to travel, to be with our friends, to move, to be with the family deteriorates. So the loneliness becomes a real problem in the aging space. And even the kids don't have enough time to spend with their parents, but parents really want to be in touch with the kids and grandkids. So the ability or the technology introduces the possibility of being involved and engaged in a way that is otherwise not possible as we get older. The other interesting aspect, as bad as the dating apps are for teenagers that really need to go out and date, they're also quite convenient and useful for people that are in their 40s or 50s and they just divorced and they have no idea how to meet other people. And this is a sort of useful tool. So I really don't want people to finish our podcast thinking that we're completely against social media and it should all be destroyed and blown up. It's a relationship like any other relationship that has its positives and negatives. And we should curate our relationship, even as adults, with social media and screens.
I'd just like to add that there is hope.
Yes.
I hope we conveyed that in the book, that as much as we said about social media and screens and how detrimental too much screen time can be, if you put down the phone or close the computer and reconnect with the actual human being, the leaky container doesn't have to be leaky anymore. You can connect and have a real relationship, and what you're losing by too much screen time can be regained in a way that, so what I'm really saying is there are many opportunities for repair, but you can't keep watching or keep scrolling or keep answering the phone.
Yeah, I would say that's what I loved about the book. It was like scary introduction, and here's all the horrible things that are happening to our brains at every age, and if you're a parent or a grandparent, and then you had a really helpful toolkit, just step by step by step, to like kind of regain control and balance with the phone or the technology. So that was, I think, one of the best parts about the book. So anyone looking to pick up a book that explains the situation and the crisis in some ways and also provides solutions, this book is fantastic. Is there anything else that you guys would like to say in closing about this fantastic book and your amazing skills as authors and psychoanalysts?
Well, thank you. I think we've covered a lot. Harry, would you like to?
I have nothing more to say, just really grateful for your time and for asking these questions and give us an opportunity. And thank you for liking the book.
Where can you get it?
Currently, there's a special on Amazon, and we want to make it widely available, so you can actually get it for free on a Kindle version. So it's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble at this point.
As an old-fashioned version, or old-fashioned person rather, I recommend hard copy. It's very easy to handle. It looks good and it reads better than Kindle, I think.
I agree. I always feel like reading a book, reading a paper is giving my brain a break. Isn't it funny that to me, like reading is a relaxing thing, even complicated things, because I just give your eyes a break, give your brain a break from the screens.
Yeah, even though you can highlight Kindle books, I think it's more pleasurable to highlight actual books. So we're in the actual book club.
Thank you, CK.
Okay, well, thank you, Karyne, for letting me be your guest host today. And thank you both. It's been a really fun and fascinating interview.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you soon.